The knocking started at exactly 2:13 a.m. 3 slow knocks, not loud, not urgent, just deliberate. I opened my eyes and stared into the darkness of the cabin. For a moment I thought I'd dreamed it. Then I looked at the digital clock beside the bed. 2:13 a.m. Another knock. Slow, evenly spaced. Someone was standing on my porch. My cabin sat near the entrance to the campground, surrounded by tall pine trees and scattered campsites. The nearest camper was at least 100 yards away. No one should have been walking around this late. The knocking came again. 3 more. I sat up slowly, listening. No voice, no footsteps, just silence. Then the faint creak of wood outside, like someone shifting their weight on the porch. I felt a chill run through me. That's when I remembered the rule. The only rule they had given me. Lock the door at 2:13 a.m. At the time, I hadn't taken it seriously. It sounded like one of those traditions seasonal workers use to mess with the new guy. But lying there in the dark, listening to someone standing just outside my cabin, it didn't feel like a joke anymore. The knocking stopped. After a few seconds, I heard slow footsteps moving off the porch. Gravel crunched. The sound faded toward the campsites. I didn't move for a long time. I stayed awake until sunrise. I should probably explain how I ended up there in the first place, because if I hadn't taken that job, I never would have learned why the campground goes quiet every night at 2:13. I found the listing online. Seasonal campground host. Remote location. Housing provided. That was it. No company name, no details, just a contact number. I called. A tired-sounding man answered. He asked if I was comfortable working alone and if I could start immediately. I said yes. He gave me directions instead of an address. GPS cuts out before you get there, he told me. That should have been my first warning. The drive took 4 hours. The last stretch wound through dense forest with no traffic, no houses, nothing but trees. Eventually, I reached a faded wooden sign. Pine Ridge Campground. The campground was small, about 15 sites spread through the woods. A few campers were already set up, tents, 1 RV, a couple trucks. The host cabin sat near the entrance. A man stood outside when I pulled in. He looked tired. Mid-50s, gray stubble, worn jacket. "You're the new host?" he said. He showed me around quickly. Radio, logbook, maintenance shed. Then he handed me a ring of keys. "That's about it," he said. "That's it?" I asked. "Quiet place." He started toward his truck, then stopped. "There is one thing." He looked past me toward the trees. "Every night at 2:13 a.m., lock your door." I smiled slightly. "Like bears?" He didn't smile. "Just lock the door," he said, "and don't go outside." Something in his voice made the air feel heavier. "Doesn't matter what you hear," he added. Then he got in his truck and left. The rest of the day was quiet. I checked in a couple campers, logged a loose sign near the trailhead, and settled into the cabin. By sunset, campfires flickered between the trees and voices drifted through the forest. It felt peaceful. By midnight, most of the campground had gone quiet. I flipped through the logbook. Every night had a short entry, same handwriting. 2:13, locked, quiet. Over and over, night after night. I glanced at the clock. 2:12 a.m. Outside, insects hummed softly. Then the clock changed. 2:13 a.m. The campground went completely silent. No insects, no wind, nothing. I stood slowly, staring into the darkness outside. Then somewhere in the campground, a car door slammed. The sound echoed through the trees and then faded into silence again. I stood near the cabin door, listening. Nothing followed. No voices, no footsteps. Just the same unnatural stillness that had settled over the campground the moment the clock hit 2:13. I moved carefully to the window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to look out. The campground sat in darkness. A few campfires still glowed faintly between the trees, and I could see the outline of a pickup truck parked at Site 4. Everything looked normal, except nothing was moving. No one walking to the restroom, no shifting shadows near tents, no late-night conversations. Just stillness. Then I heard it. Footsteps, slow, crunching softly along the gravel road. I leaned closer to the glass. At first, I didn't see anyone. Then a figure emerged from the darkness near Site 3. Tall, moving slowly between the campsites. They walked without a flashlight, without hesitation, just moving from one site to the next. The figure stopped beside a tent. I watched, holding my breath. A moment passed. Then I heard the faint sound of fabric shifting, like someone touching the side of the tent. The figure stood there for several seconds, then moved on. My grip tightened on the curtain. They weren't checking campsites like a ranger would. They weren't calling out or shining a light. They were just walking, stopping, listening. The footsteps came closer, sight by sight, slow, unhurried. Eventually, the figure reached the cabin. I stepped back from the window. The footsteps stopped just outside my door. Silence filled the room. Then, 3 slow knocks. My chest tightened. I didn't move. No voice followed, no attempt to open the door. Just silence. After several seconds, the footsteps resumed. Gravel crunched again as the figure walked past the cabin and continued down the road. I stayed frozen until the sound faded completely. Minutes passed. Then, gradually, the forest sounds returned. Insects first, then a light breeze through the trees. The campground felt normal again. I looked at the clock. 2:18 a.m. 5 minutes. Whatever that was, had only lasted 5 minutes. Morning came quietly. Sunlight filtered through the trees, and campers moved around their sites like any normal morning. Someone started coffee. A truck engine turned over. A couple hikers headed toward the trail. Everything looked ordinary. Too ordinary. I walked down toward Site 3, where I'd seen the figure stop. A middle-aged couple sat near the fire ring eating breakfast. "Morning," I said. They nodded. "Everything quiet last night?" I asked casually. "Quiet as always," the man said. "Slept great." I hesitated. "You didn't hear anyone walking around?" They both shook their heads. "Nope." I nodded and continued down the road. Nothing looked disturbed. No signs of anyone moving between campsites. When I returned to the cabin, I noticed something near the porch. Footprints. Single set, pressed lightly into the dirt. They led straight to my door. I followed them with my eyes. The tracks stopped at the porch. No return prints, no second set. Just one trail ending at my cabin door. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. Someone walking through the campground. Hard ground hiding return footprints. Maybe I'd missed something in the dark. But I locked the door earlier that night. 2:05 a.m. I turned off the cabin lights and sat beside the window, watching the empty campground. A few campers still had low fires burning. A lantern glowed faintly near Site 2. Everything looked normal. 2:12 a.m. The insects hummed softly in the trees. Then the clock changed. 2:13 a.m. The campground went silent, just like before. The lantern at Site 2 still glowed, but no one moved around it. The fire at Site 4 burned low, its smoke drifting slowly upward. Then I saw the figure again, emerging from the tree line, tall, moving slowly between the campsites. No flashlight, no hesitation, the same deliberate pace. It stopped at Site 2 this time. The lantern flickered slightly as the figure stood beside the tent. I watched, barely breathing. Then I heard the faint sound of a zipper. The tent opened slightly, but no one stepped out. The figure remained still for a few seconds, then moved on. My stomach tightened. That wasn't normal. The figure walked farther down the loop road, disappearing briefly behind a cluster of trees before reappearing near Site 5. It moved exactly the same way, stopping, listening, then continuing. Eventually, it reached the far end of the campground and disappeared into the trees. The silence held for another minute. Then, slowly, the night sounds returned. Insects, wind, distant movement. I checked the clock. 2:18 a.m. again. 5 minutes, exactly like the night before. In the morning, Site 2 was quiet. Too quiet. The tent was still there. A small folding chair sat beside the fire ring. A cooler rested near the picnic table. But no one was around. I walked closer. "Hello?" I called. No answer. The tent flap hung slightly open. Inside, I saw a sleeping bag, backpack, and a pair of boots. The car was still parked nearby, but the camper was gone. I stood there for a moment, unease settling in. People didn't just leave their gear behind. I walked back to the cabin and picked up the radio. "Ranger Station, this is Pine Ridge Host," I said. Static crackled. Then a faint voice answered. "Go ahead. I think I've got a missing camper, Site 2. Gear's still here, but no one's around." The line stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then the voice returned, weaker this time. "Did you lock your door last night?" I hesitated. "Yes." Another pause. "Stay inside at 2:13, the voice said. "We'll check in tomorrow." The transmission cut off. I lowered the radio slowly. That afternoon, I checked the logbook again. The previous host's entries continued night after night. 2:13, locked, quiet, until I reached the last page he'd written. The final entry was different. 2:13, 2 walking tonight. I stared at the words for a long moment. That night, I locked the door early. I sat in the dark and watched the clock. 2:12 a.m. The forest hummed softly. Then, 2:13 a.m. Silence. A minute passed. Then I saw movement outside. A figure stepped from the trees. Then another. 2 figures walking slowly between the campsites. One moved stiffly, unnaturally. As they passed beneath the faint glow of a campsite lantern, my stomach tightened. The second figure looked familiar. Same jacket, same height, same silhouette. It looked like the missing camper from Site 2. The 2 figures walked slowly toward the cabin. Then, just outside the door, I heard whispering. Soft, close, and one of the voices quietly said my name. I didn't move. The whisper came again, just outside the cabin. Soft, careful, like someone trying not to wake me. "Hey!" A pause, then my name again. My chest tightened. The 2 figures stood just beyond the porch light. I could see their outlines through the thin curtain. both motionless, facing the cabin. The first figure tilted its head slightly. Then came the knock. 3 slow taps against the door, exactly like the night before. But this time, it didn't stop. A second knock came from the side of the cabin, then another from the window behind me. I turned slowly. The sound came again, faint tapping against the glass. My pulse quickened. They weren't just at the door anymore. They were circling the cabin. The whisper returned, closer now. "Open up." The voice sounded wrong, flat, like someone repeating words they didn't fully understand. Another knock at the door. Then the handle moved, slowly, testing. The latch rattled once. I held my breath. The handle stopped moving. Silence filled the cabin. Then footsteps moved across the porch. Gravel crunched. The figures shifted positions outside, pacing slowly around the cabin. I moved carefully toward the window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to see. 2 figures stood near the porch, but as I watched, a third shape emerged from the trees, walking slowly toward the cabin. Tall, unsteady, it stepped into the faint glow of the porch light. My stomach dropped. I recognized the jacket, the same one worn by the previous campground host, the man who had handed me the keys. He moved stiffly like the others, slow, deliberate. The 3 figures gathered near the cabin, watching, waiting. Then the whisper came again, this time from directly outside the window beside me. "Hey." My name followed, then something worse, my own voice. "Everything's fine. Just open the door." I froze. The voice sounded like me, same tone, same cadence. Another knock. 3 slow taps, then silence. The figures remained outside for several long seconds. Then, one by one, they turned, slowly walking back toward the trees. Their shapes disappeared into the darkness. A moment later, the forest sounds returned. Wind through the branches, insects humming again. I checked the clock. 2:18 a.m. 5 minutes. Just like the other nights. Morning came quietly, but something had changed. Site 4 was empty now. Truck still parked, gear still set up. No camper. I walked slowly back to the cabin. My car sat where I'd parked it, but when I turned the key, nothing happened. The engine didn't even try to start. I tried again. Still nothing. I stepped out and checked my phone. No signal. I looked toward the campground entrance. The road stretched empty through the trees. Then I noticed something near the information board. Fresh footprints, multiple sets, all leading toward the cabin. I didn't bother trying the car again. I already knew I wasn't leaving that day. The radio still worked, but every attempt to reach the ranger station ended the same way. Static, broken voices, then silence. By afternoon, the campground felt different. Too quiet. No movement at the remaining campsites. No new arrivals. Even the hikers from earlier were gone. By sunset, I realized something worse. Every campsite was empty. Tents still stood, chairs still circled fire pits, vehicles still parked, but no people. I locked the cabin door before midnight. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the quiet room. 2:11 a.m. I sat in the dark watching the window. 2:12 a.m. The forest hummed softly. Then 2:13 a.m. Silence fell instantly. This time, movement appeared almost immediately. Figures emerged from the tree line. Not 2, not 3, dozens. They stepped slowly into the campground from every direction, moving between campsites, walking the loop road, stopping, watching. Some wore jackets, some wore hiking gear. Some moved stiffly, barely lifting their feet. I recognized a few. The missing camper, the previous host, others I'd seen earlier that day. They all moved slowly toward the cabin. My pulse pounded in my ears. The figures stopped just beyond the porch, standing in a loose circle, watching. Then one stepped forward. 3 slow knocks. I didn't move. Another figure stepped closer. Then another. Knocking began at multiple points around the cabin. Door, window, wall. Soft, deliberate, like they had all the time in the world. Then the whispering started. Voices overlapping quietly, repeating phrases, some calling my name. One voice spoke clearly near the door. "Open up." Another voice followed, my voice. "You're okay. Just open the door." I closed my eyes and stayed still. The knocking continued. Then slowly, it stopped. The figures stood motionless for several seconds. Then, one by one, they turned, walking back toward the trees, disappearing into the darkness. A moment later, the forest sounds returned. I checked the clock. 2:18 a.m. 5 minutes, just like every night. Morning came. Sunlight filtered through the trees. I stepped outside slowly. The campground was still empty, but my car started on the first try. I didn't hesitate. I packed quickly and drove toward the entrance road. As I passed the faded wooden sign, I felt the tension slowly begin to ease. Then I saw someone standing beside the road. A man, watching me leave. I slowed slightly as I passed. He didn't wave, didn't move, just stood there. And as I drove by, I realized something that made my stomach drop. He was wearing my jacket. Same color, same tear near the sleeve. I checked the rearview mirror. The figure stood motionless in the road behind me, watching as I drove away. That night, somewhere deep in Pine Ridge Campground, at exactly 2:13 a.m., there would be one more figure walking between the campsites. If you made it this far, you probably understand something I didn't that first night. Some places don't close. They just wait. Pine Ridge Campground is still open, as far as I know. You won't find much about it online, and the listing I answered disappeared a few days after I left. But every now and then, I still check maps of that region. Sometimes, I think I see a road that wasn't there before, or a clearing in the trees that looks just a little too organized. And I can't help but wonder if someone else is sitting in that cabin right now, flipping through the logbook, watching the clock, waiting for 2:13 a.m. And if they are, I hope they remember the rule, because whatever walks through that campground at 2:13, it's not looking for campers. It's looking for replacements. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Campfire Horror Stories for more slow burn horror from the quiet places most people never see. And if you've ever stayed somewhere remote, a campground, cabin, fire tower, or roadside motel, let me know in the comments. Because sometimes the scariest stories come from places that look perfectly normal during the day. Until 2:13 a.m. I'll see you in the next story.